The thermostat in the apartment had two settings, 62 and off, and Owen Marsh had learned to think of 62 as generous. He stood at the stove with a spatula in one hand and his phone pinned between his shoulder and his ear, listening to a recorded voice tell him his estimated hold time was longer than 11 minutes. The eggs were going gray at the edges. He turned them anyway. "Dad," Lily's voice came from the doorway, thin and precise the way it always was in the morning, before she'd fully decided to be awake. "The bus is early sometimes." "The bus is never early." Marcus said it was early on Tuesday. Marcus's mom drives him, and he sits at the bus stop feeling superior. Owen slid the eggs onto a plate that had once belonged to a set of 8 and was now the last survivor. "Sit, eat, the bus is not early." She sat. She was 8 and she ate the way she did everything, with a concentration that felt older than she was, folding her toast in half before she bit it because that was how her mother used to do it, and neither of them had ever said a word about that. Owen watched her out of the corner of his eye and pretended to check the calendar on the wall. The calendar was the kind you got free from the auto parts store, and it was still turned to a month that had ended 9 days ago. He flipped it forward without looking at what was written there because he already knew. Rent, circled, the little red star he used for the electric bill. And in the second week, in Lily's careful pencil, a note she'd added herself. Spring concert, 6:30, don't forget you forgot last time. He hadn't forgotten last time. He'd been under a bank's night deposit vault in another county with his arm buried to the elbow in a jammed relocker, and by the time he'd gotten the door open and driven home, she'd already sung her 3 songs and been driven back by a friend's mother who'd said, kindly, that it was really no trouble at all. Kindness like that had a way of leaving a mark. "I'll be there," he said. "You don't know what I'm looking at." "I know exactly what you're looking at." Lily gave him a long, unimpressed look over her folded toast, and it was so much her mother's look that, for a second, the kitchen went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. The phone in his shoulder came back to life. "Marsh Security and Safe, this is dispatch, you're still holding." "Still holding, Dell." "You're not a customer. Why are you in the customer queue?" "Because you people won't answer the internal line before 9. Dell laughed a wet smoker's laugh. "Got one for you, fancy one, you free today." Owen looked at his daughter at the plate at the calendar with its red star. "I'm free," he said. The address Dell texted him took 40 minutes to reach, and the last 10 of those minutes were spent climbing. The city fell away behind him as the road wound up into the hills where the houses stopped having numbers you could see from the street and started having gates instead. Owen had worked places like this before. There was a particular smell to money at this altitude, cut grass and pool chemicals, and underneath it, something he could never name, a kind of quiet that had been paid for. The van rattled as he took the switchbacks. The van rattled everywhere. He'd stopped hearing it years ago the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. The gate at the top had a call box and a camera and no name, just a brushed steel keypad and a little logo he didn't recognize, 3 interlocking rings. He pressed the button. A woman's voice clipped, "You're the safe person." "I'm the safe person." "You're late." He'd been given the address at 8:40 and it was now 9:20. He decided not to say that. "Traffic on the grade," he said, which was a lie, and the gate rolled open with a hum so smooth it was almost insulting. The house, when it appeared, did the thing that the most expensive houses did, which was to not look like much. Long, low, gray stone, glass where you'd expect walls, the whole thing pressed into the hillside like it had grown there. There was a car in the drive that cost more than Owen would earn in 4 years, and beside it a second car, under a cover, that he suspected cost more than that. The front door opened before he reached it. The woman standing there was somewhere in her 50s, and had decided at some point to stop pretending otherwise, which Owen respected until he saw her face. She was handsome in the way of a well-maintained blade. Silver hair cut short and exact. A charcoal suit on a Saturday. She held a phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, and she looked at Owen and his van and his work boots the way you'd look at something the tide had left on a clean beach. "Vivienne Hale," she said, not offering a hand. "You brought tools, I hope, not just a business card." "Both," Owen said. "Depends what's wrong." "What's wrong is that a machine that cost more than your vehicle has decided it doesn't feel like opening." She turned and walked into the house, expecting him to follow, still talking. "It's a Havelock. Grade 3, redundant relockers, the whole apparatus. The man who installed it is dead and the company that made it was bought and gutted, and the 4 so-called specialists I called before you either wanted to drill it, as though it were a rotten tooth, or told me it couldn't be done. You come recommended by someone whose judgment I have reason to trust, so." She stopped in a hallway lined with photographs Owen didn't have time to look at and gestured at a closed door. "Impress me, or don't. I've had a low bar all morning." Owen set his bag down. "Who recommended me?" "Does it matter? It tells me what they told you I do." She looked at him for a moment, reassessing, and he watched her file him somewhere slightly different than she'd first intended. "A man named Pruitt, at the bank downtown. He said you opened a vault for them that 3 insurance men had given up on, and that you didn't drill it, and that you didn't talk about it afterward." She sipped her coffee. The last part was what he emphasized. "Pruitt's a good man." "Pruitt is a nervous man, which in my experience is nearly the same thing." She pushed the door open. "It's in here." The room was an office, or the idea of one, dark wood, more of the photographs, a desk with nothing on it, which was its own kind of statement. And set into the far wall, framed by shelving that had been built around it so precisely that it looked less installed than enshrined, was the safe. Owen knew it before he was 3 steps into the room. Not the model, he knew the model, a Havelock 900 series. She was right about the relockers, but the safe itself, the specific one. There was a scar on the lower left corner of the door, a shallow gouge in the powder coat where something heavy had struck it once, long ago, and been touched up badly, and Owen had seen that scar before. He had seen it from 18 inches away, in a fluorescent-lit room, in a building that no longer existed. On an afternoon he had spent the better part of 6 years trying not to think about. He kept his face where it was. That was a skill, too, and one he'd paid more for than any other. "Something wrong," Vivienne said. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. She was the kind of person who noticed everything and used most of it as a weapon. "Old machine," Owen said. "Older than it looks. They stopped making this series in a hurry." "Why in a hurry?" "There was a recall." He crouched in front of it, set his bag down, and did not open it yet. "Not this model, a sister model, but it spooked people." He ran his thumb along the edge of the door, along the scar, feeling the ridge of the bad touch-up under his skin. "Where'd you get it?" "Is that relevant?" "Everything's relevant. A safe's like a person. To open it you have to know a little about where it's been." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "It came with the house." It had not come with the house. Owen was as sure of that as he'd ever been sure of anything, but he only nodded and said, "You have the combination." "If I had the combination, I would have opened it myself, and not spent my Saturday watching a stranger touch my things." "So it's locked and you don't have the code." "It's locked, I have the code, and the code doesn't work." She set her coffee down on the bare desk, hard enough to make a point. "It's worked for 11 years. I turned it Thursday and it did nothing. I turned it again and it did nothing. It's not a matter of a forgotten number. Something inside it has failed and I need it opened, and I need—" She paused, and for just a moment something moved under the polished surface of her, something she put back down almost before he saw it. "I need what's inside. Today. Not next week. Today." Owen looked up at her. "What's inside?" "None of your concern." "It's a little bit my concern. If it's cash, that's one job. If it's documents, that's a job where I go slow. If it's something that doesn't like being tilted, I need to know before I start moving weight around. Her jaw worked. He'd cornered her into a small honesty and she hated it. Papers, she said finally. And one other thing. Nothing that will break if you tip it if that's what you're asking. Just be careful with the papers. They matter. They usually do, Owen said and opened his bag. He worked for the better part of an hour without speaking, and she did not leave. That was unusual. Most clients found something else to do. They didn't like watching the slow, patient, uneventful reality of the work, the long stretches where a man knelt in front of a metal box with a stethoscope and did nothing that looked like anything. Vivienne Hale sat in the desk chair with her ankles crossed and her phone dark in her lap and watched him with the flat attention of a cat at a mouse hole, and after the first 20 minutes Owen understood that she wasn't watching the safe. She was watching him. "You have a scar on your hand," she said into the silence. "The right one. Between the first two knuckles." "Occupational." "From what?" "A drill bit that decided it would rather be somewhere else." "You said you don't drill." "I don't, that's how I learned not to." He shifted the dial a quarter turn, listening. "You always interview the help this thoroughly." "Only the ones who lie to me about traffic." She let that sit. "There's no traffic on the grade at 9 on a Saturday. I know because I drive it every day. So either you overslept, which I'd respect, or something delayed you, which I'd want to know about, or you simply don't like being on time for people like me, which I'd understand better than you'd think." She tilted her head. "Which is it?" Owen kept his eyes on the dial. "My daughter had a thing about the bus." It came out before he decided to say it, and he regretted it instantly, the way you regret handing a stranger something breakable. Vivienne went still in a new way. "How old?" she said, not a question quite. 8. "And her mother?" "Not in the picture." "Dead or gone?" Owen looked up at her then and let her see that she'd reached the edge of it. "That's a little bit not your concern," he said, without heat, and after a moment she inclined her head, one professional acknowledging another's boundary, and went back to watching his hands. But something had shifted in the room, and they both felt it, and neither of them named it. It was 11 minutes past 11 when the safe gave up its first secret, which was that it had not failed at all. Owen sat back on his heels and wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and said, "Huh. Huh is not a diagnosis. The mechanism's fine, perfect actually. This thing'll outlive both of us." He tapped the dial. "It's not broken, Ms. Hale, it's been changed. Somebody reset the combination. Recently. Within the last," he leaned in, checked the wear pattern on the dial face, the faint bright arcs where fingers had turned it to specific numbers over and over, few days. "Somebody changed your code and didn't tell you." The silence that followed was so complete that Owen could hear the pool filter running somewhere on the other side of the house. When he looked up, Vivienne Hale had gone the color of the stone the house was built from. She was staring at the safe as though it had spoken to her, and for the first time since she'd opened the front door with her coffee and her contempt, she looked like a person to whom something could actually happen. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice had lost its edge. "No one else has the code, no one, it was mine, it was only ever mine." "Somebody else had it," Owen said gently, because he'd delivered this kind of news before and he knew there was no version of it that didn't land like a blow. "You can't reset one of these from the outside. You need the current combination and you need the change key, and the change key for this series is a specific tool that maybe 50 people in the state know how to use." He paused. "To change your code, someone had to have your code first. And then stand right here at this dial, with a tool most people have never heard of, and do it on purpose." She sat down, not gracefully. She lowered herself into the desk chair the way a much older woman might, one hand finding the armrest, and she looked at the scar on the lower left corner of the safe door. The same scar Owen had recognized on the way in, and Owen watched her look at it, and he watched her recognize it too. and a cold understanding passed between them that neither of them yet had words for. "Can you still open it?" she said, quietly. "Yeah, it's slower this way. Manipulation instead of the code, but yeah, I can open it." "How long?" "Couple hours, maybe 3. This series doesn't give up easy, that's what you paid for." Vivienne Hale looked at the safe, and then she looked at Owen Marsh, kneeling on her office floor in his work boots and his cheap jacket, this single father she had mocked at her own front door 2 hours before, and something in her face rearranged itself into an expression he'd remember for a long time. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was closer to fear, but it was aimed at him like a request. "Open it," she said, "and Mr. Marsh, whatever's inside, I need you to not tell anyone what you see. Can you do that?" Owen thought about Prewitt, nervous Prewitt, and the one thing he'd emphasized. He thought about the scar on the door. He thought about a fluorescent room in a building that no longer existed, and the last time he'd stood in front of this exact safe, and what it had cost him, and who had been standing beside him then. "I can keep a secret," he said. "It's the thing I'm best at." He turned back to the dial, and as he pressed the stethoscope to the cold steel and closed his eyes and began, very slowly, to listen for the small mechanical truth waiting inside, he already knew, with a certainty that sat in his chest like a stone, that whatever was behind Vivienne Hale's safe code was going to change both their lives, and that he was the only person on earth who would understand what it meant when the door finally swung open. Behind him, Vivienne Hale picked up her cold coffee, looked at it, and set it back down without drinking. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. The manipulation went the way it always went, which was to say slowly, and in silence, and with the particular loneliness of a job that could not be shared. Owen worked the dial in small increments, listening through the stethoscope for the 2 sounds that mattered: the soft contact of the drive cam against the fence, the fractional heaviness when a wheel found its gate. Most people thought safecracking was a matter of hearing tumblers fall, because they'd seen it in movies. There were no tumblers. There were wheels, stacked on a spindle, each notched with a gate, and the work was the patient business of graphing where each wheel wanted to stop and reading the small resistances in the dial, the way a doctor reads a pulse. It was arithmetic done with your fingertips. It was the most boring thing in the world, and Owen loved it more than almost anything, because when he was doing it, there was no room in his head for anything else. Except today there was. Today the room kept intruding, the scar on the door, the bad touch-up, and the memory it dragged up behind it, the one he'd been keeping in a locked place of his own for 6 years. The building had been a regional processing center for an armored transport company, out past the airport, a windowless concrete box that smelled of cigarettes and floor wax. Owen had been 29 and good and stupid, in the specific way that a man is stupid when he's good at something and hasn't yet been punished for it. He'd worked there as a vault tech. And the man who'd trained him, the man who'd stood beside him at this exact safe on the afternoon Owen was trying not to remember, had been named Silas Rourke. Silas had been the best Owen ever saw, better than Owen, and Owen was not modest about his own hands. Silas could open things that had no business opening. He could stand in front of a machine and become so still that the machine seemed to relax, to want to tell him its secret, and Owen had spent 2 years trying to learn how a person made himself into that kind of stillness. Silas had taught him the trade and the ethics of it in the same breath, the 2 things braided together so tightly that Owen had never been able to separate them since. You hold people's whole lives behind these doors, Silas used to say. Their money, sure, but their letters, their guns. The rings off dead wives, the things they can't throw away and can't look at. You open the door and you don't look at what's inside, and if you look, you sure as hell don't remember, and if you remember, you die with it. That's the job. The metal's the easy part. And then one night the money in the vault had come up short. A lot of money, an amount that made the company go pale and the police go quiet. And there were exactly 2 men who had the access and the skill to have taken it without leaving a mark. And one of them had a clean record and a daughter on the way, and the other one had a gambling debt he'd never mentioned and a way of getting very still. And Owen had told the investigators the truth, which was everything he knew, which was not much, and which had been enough. Silas Rourke went to prison for 11 years. He'd never confessed. He'd looked at Owen once across the courtroom, a long look with nothing in it that Owen could read, and Owen had spent 6 years unable to decide whether that look meant you did this to me, or I understand why you did, or nothing at all, just a tired man looking at a room. Owen had left the company, left the industry almost, come back to it slowly and on his own, one van, no employees, working the jobs nobody else wanted, and he had gotten very good at not thinking about Silas Rourke. The safe in front of him was a Havelock 900 with a bad touch-up on the lower left corner of the door, and it was the last safe Silas Rourke and Owen Marsh had ever opened together, the week before the money went missing, in a building that had been demolished 4 years ago to put up a parking structure. There was no reason on earth for it to be in Vivienne Hale's office. The third wheel found its gate. Owen noted the number and moved on, and behind him Vivienne said, "You've slowed down." "It's slow work. You slowed down 4 minutes ago, right after you touched that corner of the door again." She was still in the chair, but she was leaning forward now, elbows on her knees, watching him with that flat feline attention. "You keep touching that corner. Why?" Owen didn't turn around. "Habit." "You don't have habits. I've been watching you for 2 hours. Every single thing you do on purpose. You don't reach for a tool until you know you need it. You don't shift your weight until you've decided to. And 3 times now you've put your thumb on that one scratch like you're checking that it's still there." Her voice had gone quiet and precise, the interrogator's register, and Owen understood that whatever else Vivienne Hale was, she had spent a great deal of her life getting the truth out of people who didn't want to give it. "You recognize this safe?" It wasn't a question, and Owen had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do with a person like this was lie badly. So he told a true thing that wasn't the truth. "I've worked on this model before," he said. "It's rare. You develop a feel for the ones you've met." He turned the dial another notch. "That's all." "That's not all. It's what I've got for you." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, the man who left me this house didn't own a Havelock. I knew everything he owned down to the cufflinks. This safe was installed 11 years ago and the house is 30. Someone put it here after. Someone had it built into this wall, into this shelving, so it would look like it had always been part of the room." She said it slowly, and Owen realized she was working it out as she spoke, the same way he was, the two of them assembling the same terrible shape from opposite ends. 11 years ago. That's when it was installed, and you touch that scar like you've met it before. The fourth wheel gated. Owen's hands didn't stop. But his mind had gone very cold and very clear, because 11 years ago was when Silas Rourke had gone to prison, and a safe installed the same year in secret, with a scar that Owen would have known blind. That was not a coincidence. That was a message, and it had been sitting in this wall for over a decade waiting for the one man who'd understand it to kneel down in front of it. "Ms. Hale," Owen said, "the man who left you this house, what was his name?" She didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice had changed. Some of the steel had come back into it, but it was defensive steel now, a person guarding a wound. "Why?" "Because I think somebody built this safe to be found, and I think they built it to be found by somebody specific. And I'd like to know if I'm about to open a door that's got my name on it." The pool filter hummed. Somewhere in the house, a clock Owen hadn't seen struck the half hour with a soft, expensive chime. "His name was Gerald Ashby," Vivienne said. "He was my husband for 19 years. He died 14 months ago. And before you ask, no, I don't know why he'd have a safe he never told me about, installed by someone he never mentioned, hidden in a room I sat in 1,000 times." Her hands had knotted together in her lap. "I found the paperwork after he died. A maintenance contract. That's how I knew the model, the installer, all of it. The installer's dead now. I told you that. I didn't tell you his name because I didn't think it mattered. She looked at the safe. Do you want his name? Owen already knew. He knew it the way you know the last step in a staircase in the dark, the drop of your stomach before your foot even lands. But he said, yeah, I want his name. Silas Rourke, Vivienne said. And Owen Marsh, who could keep his face still through almost anything, who had built a whole second life on the foundation of a face that gave nothing away, felt something move across it that he could not stop, and Vivienne Hale saw it, and her eyes went wide. You knew him, she said. Owen turned back to the safe. His hands were not quite steady, and he waited until they were before he touched the dial again. Ms. Hale, I'm going to open this now. It won't be long. And when it's open, I think we should both be sitting down. You knew him. Yeah, Owen said, I knew him. The fifth wheel found its gate at 11:52. The sixth, the last, the mean one, the reason people paid what they paid for a Havelock 900, gave itself up at 4 minutes past noon with a soft internal shift that Owen felt more than heard, a sensation like a held breath finally let go. He sat back. He put the stethoscope in his bag. He rolled his shoulders, and the small, ordinary human sound of his joints cracking was very loud in the room. It's open, he said, or it will be when I turn the handle. I haven't turned it. I wanted to ask you one more time. He looked at her. You sure you want to see what's in here? Because a man went to a lot of trouble to hide this from you, and sometimes people hide things because they love you. Not always, but sometimes. Once I turn this handle, you don't get to unknow whatever's inside. That's the one thing I can't do. I can open any door in the world. I can't close one. It was the most he'd said all day, and it came out rougher than he meant it to, because he wasn't only talking about her. Vivienne Hale stood up. She crossed the room and stood beside him, close enough that he could smell her coffee and something underneath it. Some expensive dry perfume gone stale over a long morning, and she looked down at the safe with an expression he couldn't name. I've spent 14 months, she said, believing I knew who my husband was. Turn the handle, Mr. Marsh. Owen turned the handle. The door swung open on hinges so well machined they made no sound at all, and the interior light. There was an interior light. A small warm bulb that came on when the door opened, and it told Owen more about how much this safe had cost than anything else had. The interior light came on and showed them what was inside. There were papers, a thick brown envelope unmarked, and beneath it a stack of documents in a leather folder, and Vivienne made a small sound and reached for them, and Owen said, "Wait," and she stopped, because there was something else in the safe, tucked into the back, and Owen had seen it first. It was a second envelope, smaller, white. And across the front of it, in handwriting that Owen knew, in the sharp, forward-leaning hand of a man who had taught him how to hold a dial and how to hold a secret, were written 2 words. Not Vivienne's name. Owen's. Owen Marsh, the envelope said, in Silas Rourke's handwriting, and beneath it, smaller, underlined once. If it's you reading this, and it will be you, start here. For a long moment, neither of them moved. That's your name, Vivienne said. Her voice had gone strange and flat. There's an envelope in my husband's secret safe with your name on it, in the dead installer's handwriting. She turned to look at Owen, and all the contempt of the morning was gone, and what had replaced it was worse, because it was the beginning of a real and specific fear. Who are you? Who did I let into my house? Owen looked at his own name in a dead man's hand, sitting in a safe that shouldn't exist, in a house he'd never heard of, belonging to a man he'd never met, married to a woman who'd mocked him at her own front door 3 hours ago, and he understood with total clarity that the job he'd driven up the hill to do that morning had never been about the safe at all. The safe had been the bait. He was the thing being opened. Ms. Hale, Owen said quietly, I think you'd better sit back down, and I think I'd better tell you about a man named Silas Rourke. And then I think we should read what he wrote, because he went to 11 years of trouble to make sure I'd be the one standing here when this door came open, and Silas never in his life did anything without a reason. He picked up the envelope with his name on it. It was heavier than paper should be. There was something inside it besides a letter. Outside, on the far side of the tinted glass, a car Owen hadn't heard arrive was rolling slowly to a stop in the drive, and a man was getting out of it and looking up at the house, and neither Owen nor Vivienne had noticed yet. But they would. In about 90 seconds they would. The doorbell rang, and it was the most ordinary sound in the world, and it made both of them jump. Vivienne recovered first. She was good at that. Owen was learning. She had a lifetime of practice at putting her face back together in the half-second before a door opened. She crossed to the window and looked down at the drive and went very still. "Do you know that man?" she asked. Owen came to stand beside her. Below them, on the pale stone of the front step, stood a man of about 60 in a good coat, hands folded in front of him, patient as a mourner, silver at the temples, a lawyer's stillness. Owen had never seen him before in his life. "No," Owen said. "You." "No," she frowned. "But he rang the bell like he expected me to be home, and he's not looking at the door. Look, he's looking up, at this window." She stepped back out of sight, and something in the movement was purely instinctive, the flinch of prey. "He knew which room we'd be in." The bell rang again. Then, muffled by glass and distance, a voice pitched to Carrie, unhurried. "Mrs. Ashby, my name is Theodore Vance. I represented your husband for 22 years. I'm not here to alarm you. I'm here because the safe has been opened, and I was instructed to arrive within the hour of it being opened, and I have kept that appointment for 14 months without knowing when it would come." A pause. "You'll want to hear what I have to say before you read anything in that box. Please." Vivienne looked at Owen. Owen looked at the envelope in his hand with his own name on it. "How does he know the safe's open?" Owen said low. "There's no alarm on it. I'd have heard it." "I checked." "There's no alarm on it." She was staring at the safe now, at the little warm interior light still glowing. "Unless the alarm isn't a sound, unless opening it sends a signal somewhere." Her mouth thinned. "Gerald, you paranoid, elaborate man, what did you do?" "She went to let him in." Owen almost stopped her. Every instinct he had, honed on years of walking into strangers' houses and reading danger off the walls, told him that a man who arrives the instant a hidden safe opens is not a man who brings good news. But it wasn't his house, and it wasn't his call, and there was an envelope in his hand telling him to start here. So he slid the envelope into his jacket against his chest where he could feel it, and he followed her out. Theodore Vance took a seat in the front room without being offered one, which told Owen most of what he needed to know about the man's confidence, and set a slim leather case on his knees, which told him the rest. "You're not alone," Vance said, looking at Owen. It wasn't a greeting. "That's good, it's better, actually. He hoped you'd be here." His eyes moved over Owen's boots, his jacket, and unlike Vivienne's assessment that morning, there was no contempt in it, only a kind of careful measuring. "You're the technician, Mr. Marsh." Owen didn't sit. "You know my name." "I've known your name for 6 years. I've had a folder with your name on it for 6 years. Vance folded his hands on the leather case. "Mrs. Ashby, I'm going to tell you some things now that will be difficult, and I'd ask you to let me finish before you decide how you feel about me, because you're going to want to throw me out of this house somewhere around the 3rd sentence, and if you do, you'll never learn the rest, and Gerald was very clear that you should learn the rest." He took a breath. "Your husband's real name was not Gerald Ashby. That was a name he purchased, along with a history to go with it, 23 years ago. Before that, he was a man named Marcus Rourke. Silas Rourke was his younger brother." The room went so quiet Owen could hear the second hand on the clock. Vivienne did not throw him out. She sat down slowly on the arm of a chair, as if her legs had made the decision without her, and she said, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "Say that again." Your husband was Silas Rourke's older brother. They were estranged for most of their adult lives, a falling out over money, which was the only thing the Rourke family ever fell out over. Gerald, I'll keep calling him Gerald. It's easier. Gerald built himself into a wealthy and respectable man under a name that wasn't his. Silas stayed what he was, which was the best safe and vault man in the state and a gambler and eventually a convict. Vance turned to Owen. You know that part. You put him there. I told the truth about what I knew, Owen said. That's all I did. I'm aware so was Silas. That's the whole reason we're all in this room. Vance opened the leather case. May I? Nobody said no. He drew out a single sheet of paper and set it on the coffee table, turned so they could both read it, and Owen leaned in and saw that it was a photocopy of a bank ledger, an internal transfer record, the kind of document that had been at the center of the worst year of his life. 11 years ago, Vance said, a great deal of money went missing from an armored transport company's vault. 2 men had the access and the skill. One was Silas Rourke, one was you. He tapped the paper. Silas took the money. Owen said nothing. He'd always assumed as much. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like an old bruise being pressed. But he didn't take it the way everyone thought, Vance went on. He didn't take it for himself and he didn't gamble it away, though he let everyone believe he had because that story was simpler and it protected the person he took it for. He looked at Vivienne. He took it for his brother, for Gerald. Your husband was, at that time, 3 weeks from a collapse that would have exposed him. The false name, the false history, all of it. A fraud 20 years deep that was about to come apart and take your entire life down with it. You didn't know. You were never supposed to know. Silas found out, and Silas did the one thing he knew how to do, which was to reach into a place no one else could reach and pull out enough money to make a problem disappear. Vance's voice was very level. And then he took the fall for it. Alone. 11 years. To keep his brother's secret and to keep your life standing, Mrs. Ashby, on a foundation you didn't know was rotten. Vivienne had one hand over her mouth. Above it her eyes were wet and furious, and disbelieving all at once. Why, she said, why would they hated each other? You said they hated each other. They did. That's what made it the largest thing he ever did. Vance closed the case. You don't do that for a brother you love. Love makes sacrifice cheap. He did it for a brother he couldn't stand, because underneath the hatred there was still the word brother, and to Silas Rourke that word meant something even when he wished it didn't. He looked at Owen. He never blamed you, Mr. Marsh. He told me so directly more than once. You told the truth. He always said a man who tells the truth under pressure is worth 10 who lie, and he said he'd rather have gone to prison on the word of an honest man than walked free on the word of a liar. He meant it. He asked me to make sure you knew it. Owen had to look away at the window, at the covered car in the drive, at anything. 6 years he'd carried a look from across a courtroom he couldn't read, and it turned out the look had meant I understand why you did, and it turned out understanding it now, in this room from a stranger, was harder than never knowing had been. He's out, Owen said when he could. 11 years, he'd be out now or close. He was released 4 months ago, Vance said. Yes. Then why isn't he telling me this himself? Why the safe? Why the letter? Why the Owen gestured at the whole impossible apparatus of it, the hidden machine, the timed lawyer, the envelope against his chest? Why any of this theater? If he wanted me to know, he could have knocked on my door. Theodore Vance was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet Owen felt the floor of the day drop out from under him a second time, because he knew, the way he'd known Rourke's name before Vivienne said it, what was coming. Because Silas Rourke died 6 weeks ago, Vance said gently. He came out of prison sick. He was sick the last 2 years inside and he hid it, because hiding things was the family trade. He had time to arrange his affairs and very little else. This, he nodded at the office, the safe, all of it, this was the last thing he built. He couldn't open his own life to you in person, So he built a door and he put everything behind it, and he made certain that the only man in the world who could open it without destroying what was inside would be the man he wanted to have it. Vance stood. You, Mr. Marsh. He didn't hire you by accident this morning. Pruitt at the bank owed Silas a favor 20 years old. The recommendation came from a dead man. Owen sat down. He hadn't meant to. There was a chair behind him and he found it. The envelope with your name, Vance said. You have it. I can see the shape of it in your jacket. I don't know what's in it, he didn't tell me, and I didn't ask because some doors aren't mine. But he told me to tell you one thing in his exact words, and then I'll go, because the rest of this is yours and hers and not mine. He picked up his case. He said, tell Owen the money was never the secret. Tell him to open the last one. He'll know which. The last one, Owen said. The last what? But Theodore Vance was already at the door, and he only paused there, one hand on the frame, and looked back at the two of them. The widow who just learned her whole marriage stood on another man's sacrifice, and the safecracker who'd just been forgiven by a ghost, and something almost like pity crossed his lawyer's face. He said you'd know, Vance said. He said you always know, once you stop looking at the door and start listening to it. And then he was gone, and a moment later they heard his car start, and reverse, and roll back down the hill, leaving the two of them alone in a house that had just become a completely different house than the one Owen had driven up to that morning. Vivienne Hale spoke first. She'd taken her hand from her mouth. Her voice was wrecked, but it was hers again. Open your envelope, Mr. Marsh, she said. I think we've both waited long enough to stop being lied to. Owen took the envelope out of his jacket. It was heavier than paper. He'd known that from the first. He turned it over and slid his thumb under the flap and opened the last thing Silas Rourke had ever written to him. Inside was a single folded page, and taped to the inside of the page, cold and small and catching the afternoon light, was a key. Not a safe key. Owen knew safe keys, and this wasn't one. This was older, stranger, a long-barreled key, the kind that opened something that had been made a very long time ago, a key with a shape Owen had seen exactly once before in his life. He unfolded the page. Silas's handwriting, weaker than it had been 11 years ago, the letters not quite holding their line but unmistakably his. Owen, if you're reading this, the machine did its job and so did you, and I'm sorry I couldn't say most of this to your face. There wasn't time and there wasn't the nerve. A man can be brave about a lot of things and still be a coward about the ones that matter. The money was never the secret. You'll have figured that out by now, or Vance told you. The secret is what the money was for, and it isn't what he told you either, because I never told him all of it. I only ever told one person all of it, and that person is dead too, and that's the whole reason this key exists. There's a safe I never told you about. Not this one. This one was just to get you in the door. The real one is where it always was, in the place I taught you the trade, except the place is gone now. They tore it down, so I moved what was inside it years ago before I went in, and I put it somewhere only you'll think to look, because I taught you where to look. Ask yourself the question I always asked you, not where would a man hide something. Any fool can answer that. Ask, where would this particular man hide something, given everything I know about how his mind works? You know how my mind works, Owen. I built it into yours on purpose. The key opens it. When you find it, you'll understand why I couldn't leave it to Vivienne or to a lawyer or to anyone whose hands I couldn't trust. There's a name inside, a real one. And when you read it, you're going to have to decide what kind of man you are, the same way you decided 6 years ago. I hope you decide the same way. I'm betting my whole ledger on it. Start with the concert, you'll understand. Yes. Owen read it twice. Then he read the last 2 lines a third time, and the blood went out of his face, because start with the concert meant nothing to Theodore Vance and nothing to Vivienne Hale, and nothing to anyone alive on earth except Owen Marsh, who had a daughter, who had a spring concert circled on a free calendar from the auto parts store, at 6:30 that very evening, don't forget, and who had never once in his entire life mentioned his daughter's concert to Silas Rourke. Because 6 years ago when Silas went to prison, Lily had not yet been born, which meant that Silas Rourke had known about Owen's life, recently, had been watching, had known about the concert tonight, specifically, this specific evening, and had timed a safe and a lawyer and a dead man's letter to land on Owen's chest on the one afternoon when Owen already had somewhere he could not fail to be. "What is it?" Vivian said, watching his face. "What does it say? You've gone white." Owen looked up at her, the key cold in his palm, his daughter's handwriting suddenly vivid in his mind. "You forgot last time." And he understood that the day was not over, that it had barely begun, and that before the sun went down, he was going to have to choose between the last request of the man he'd sent to prison and the one promise on earth he'd sworn he would never break again. "It says," Owen said slowly, "that I've got until 6:30 tonight. And it says he's been watching my daughter." He told Vivienne most of it, not all. He left out the exact shape of the old key, and he left out the line about deciding what kind of man he was, because that line was his to carry. But he told her about the concert and about being watched, and he watched her do the arithmetic on her own face. "He knew you had somewhere to be," she said. "He built the whole thing to land on the one day you'd be torn." She shook her head slowly. "That's not cruelty. My husband would have called that cruelty. This is a test. He wanted to see whether you'd drop your daughter for his secret, because if you would, you weren't the man he thought and the secret wasn't safe with you." She met his eyes. "He's still opening you, even dead. He's turning the dial." "Then I'll give him his answer," Owen said and stood. "I'm going to the concert. Whatever's behind that door has waited 11 years. It can wait one more night." Something eased in Vivienne's shoulders, a tension he hadn't known she was holding, and he understood that she'd been afraid he'd choose the safe, that she'd spent the whole afternoon learning what men choose, and had braced to watch him choose wrong. "Good," she said quietly. "Then let me help you make sure it does wait. Because if a lawyer arrived within the hour, someone else is watching that box too. And I'd rather they find it empty." The thing about where would this particular man hide something was that Owen already knew, and had known since he'd read the line, and had been refusing to know for the better part of an hour, because the answer frightened him. Silas had taught him the trade in a windowless room, but he'd taught him the ethics of it somewhere else, in a public place, on purpose, because a man who only talks about honesty behind locked doors doesn't believe it. He'd taken a 19-year-old Owen to concerts. Cheap ones, community hall ones, a folding chair symphony where the second violinist was always flat. And every time, Silas had made him check the same thing. The fire panel in the lobby, the old brass one, because the one box in every building that nobody's allowed to lock, and nobody ever opens, and everybody walks past, that's where a smart man hides what he can't afford to lose. Lily's spring concert was at the community hall on Fenwick Street, the same hall. Silas had known. Silas had chosen it, had put whatever this was into the one building where Owen's daughter would be singing on the one night the letter came open. The old man had folded Owen's whole life into a single point in space and time, so that there was no version of the evening where Owen did his duty as a father and also failed to walk past the answer. Owen laughed once, short and disbelieving, in the van on the grade. "You beautiful, terrible bastard," he said out loud to a dead man. "You made it so I couldn't lose either one." He made the concert with 11 minutes to spare. Lily saw him from the risers before the lights went down, and her whole face changed, not surprise, quite, but the specific relief of a kid who'd let herself hope and then braced for the hope to break. She lifted one hand, small, at her side, so the teacher wouldn't see. Owen lifted his back. He sat in the third row on a folding chair identical to the ones he'd sat in at 19, and in the lobby behind him, 30 feet away, was a brass fire panel that had been there since before either of them was born. She sang 3 songs. She was not the best singer up there, and she was not the worst, and she folded down over the high note in the second song the way she folded her toast, and Owen watched her and thought about a man who traded 11 years of his life for a brother he couldn't stand, and understood, finally and completely, what Silas had been trying to teach him that whole last week before the money vanished. You hold people's whole lives behind these doors. It had never been about metal. He didn't move toward the fire panel until the concert was over, and the parents were milling in the lobby with paper cups of juice, because Silas had taught him that too. The safest time to open a thing in public is when the public is busy being public. Lily found him first, barreling into his side, and he held her against his hip and drank his terrible juice and told her she was wonderful. And she said, "You came," not as a question, as a fact she was putting on the record, and he said, "I said I would." And she said, "You said that last time." And he had no answer to that except to hold on a little tighter. And then, with his daughter's hand in his and a crowd of ordinary people flowing around them, Owen Marsh reached up with his free hand and opened a fire panel that no one had opened in years. And behind the dusty extinguisher and the coiled hose, taped flat to the back of the box, was a small steel case the size of a paperback, with a keyhole that matched the long-barreled key in his pocket. He didn't open it there. He drove home first and made Lily her dinner and read her 2 chapters instead of 1 because it was that kind of night, and sat with her until she slept. And only then, at the kitchen table under the light, with the auto parts calendar on the wall and the concert crossed off in her pencil with a small triumphant checkmark, she'd added herself, did he turn the key. Inside was a photograph and a folded page and a bank routing document. The photograph was of 2 boys, maybe 10 and 7, squinting into a summer sun, the older one's arm slung around the younger one's neck in that rough way of brothers who'd fight again within the hour. On the back, in Silas's hand, "Marcus and me, before the money got into everything." And the folded page had a name on it, a real one. The name of the man who had actually walked out of that armored transport vault 11 years ago with the money in a bag, because Silas hadn't taken it after all. Silas had covered for the man who did, a 3rd employee, a supervisor named on that page, a man who'd threatened to expose Gerald's fraud unless Silas ate the charge, and who had spent 11 years free and comfortable and rising, and who was, Owen saw with a slow, cold turn of the stomach, now a senior officer at the very bank where Nervous Pruitt worked. The routing document was the proof, the trail of the money, patiently reconstructed, that Silas had spent his last free months assembling to hand to the one person he trusted to do the right thing with it. And when you read it, the letter had said, "You're going to have to decide what kind of man you are." Owen sat with it a long time. He could burn it, let the dead stay dead and the guilty stay comfortable and keep his quiet life and his quiet daughter and never walk back into a room with lawyers in it. Silas would understand. Silas of all people would understand the appeal of eating a truth to keep a life standing. But Silas hadn't burned it. Sick, dying, out of time, the old man had built a machine of impossible patience to put this exact choice into the hands of the one man who'd once told the truth under pressure and lost everything for it and never lied about it since. "I'm betting my whole ledger on it." Owen looked at the photograph of 2 boys in the sun. He looked at the checkmark on the calendar, his daughter's small proof that this time he had kept his word. Then he took out his phone, and he called Vivienne Hale, because she'd earned the rest of it, and because a woman who'd learned in one afternoon that her whole life stood on another man's sacrifice deserved to help decide what that sacrifice finally bought. "I found it," he said when she answered. "I know what he wanted, and I know who really did it." There was a silence on the line. Then, in the voice she'd used at the very end, stripped of all its morning steel, "What are you going to do?" Owen looked at the name on the page. Outside the window the hills were dark and the city was a low glow beneath them, and somewhere down in that glow, a comfortable man was sleeping easy on 11 stolen years. The same thing I did last time, Owen said. I'm going to tell the truth. Sela's already paid for it. Seems wrong to let it go to waste. They didn't hand it to the police that week or the next. Vivienne knew people, and she knew that a truth thrown down carelessly gets swept up and buried, so they built it the way Sela's would have, patiently, quietly, every wheel finding its gate before they turned the last one. The routing document went to the right auditor. The photograph stayed with Owen. And when it finally broke, months later, it broke clean, and a senior bank officer was walked out of a building he'd risen through on someone else's ruined years. And Sela's Rourke's conviction was posthumously set aside on a Tuesday afternoon that Owen spent, deliberately, at his daughter's school play, because he'd made a rule about it. Vivienne Ashby, she kept the name. It was hers now, no matter whose it had been, sold the house on the hill and bought a smaller one, and had the Havelock 900 taken out of the wall and delivered to Owen's shop, because, she said, it belonged with someone who understood it. It sat in his workroom after that, the scar on its lower left corner touched up properly now, by Owen, in the right color, and sometimes Lily did her homework on top of it because it was exactly the right height. She asked him once whose it had been, the safe. A man who taught me my job, Owen said. Was he nice? Owen thought about it. He never lied to her, that was the other rule. No, he said, he wasn't nice. Nice is easy. He was something better than nice, and it cost him everything, and I didn't understand it until it was too late to tell him. He tapped the steel. But I understand it now, and I'm trying to be it. That's the best I've got, kiddo. Lily considered this with the older-than-she-was concentration she gave everything, and then she folded the corner of her worksheet down, the way her mother used to, the way she always would, and went back to her long division. And Owen Marsh, single father, keeper of secrets, the man Vivienne Hale had mocked at her own front door on a Saturday morning and had come, over one long strange day, to trust with the only truth that mattered, stood in his workroom with his hand flat on a dead man's safe and felt, for the first time in 6 years, that the door inside his own chest had finally, quietly, swung open.